ability to access content when you need it, in whatever form you may need it. Second perspective, I'll elaborate on both, don't worry. Second perspective revolves around accessibility. The second perspective to this point here is accessibility. Okay, let me take the first one. The ability to access content when you need it, in whatever form you need it. This, to a fairly large extent, is going to fall in the realm of this terminology, which I hope many of us can relate to. Can we? Can we
Yes.
relate to that term?
Yes.
It's an acronym that stands for
Internet of Things.
Internet of Things, indeed. Here's a simple example. Imagine I want to find out if it's going to rain this evening, because based on that, there are a few things I may want to do. So I possibly am going to go to a weather web application or a weather site, and I'm going to look up the weather forecast. Oh, is it going to rain today? If it's going to rain, then maybe on this site there would be a picture of a cloud with some droplets of water. If there's going to be a thunderstorm, there's probably going to be a picture of a cloud with some lightning strike. If it's not going to rain, then probably just a picture of a cloud, maybe partly cloudy and things like that. And there's going to be a lot of other information also if there's humidity and so on and so forth. Let's imagine there are these devices which also require access to weather information. And apparently there are such devices. One example is a smart air conditioning equipment. Primarily, I hope everyone has heard of a piece of hardware called a thermostat. Have we heard of a thermostat? A piece of hardware?
Yes.
Okay. A thermostat is a piece of hardware which is usable in quite a number of appliances like water heaters. It's used in air conditioning equipment. It's also used in our PCs. On the processor, there's a heat sink that's mounted. The heat sink is associated with the thermostat, which in turn is wired to the fan. So basically, as the temperature rises, the thermostat is going to instruct the fans to run faster so that that heat can be dissipated. All right. So, I mean, that's more to do with circuitry and electronics and all of that. But let's say I'm talking about a smart air conditioner. And this air conditioner requires internet connectivity. Might sound a little weird. Why would an air conditioner need internet connectivity? Here's what it could do. Every hour, once every hour, it could check a particular website, maybe Weather Channel or something like that. It could check a particular website to find out what the weather is going to be like for the next 1 or 2 hours. And depending on the data, it could automatically adjust the ambient temperature with very little or maybe even no human intervention. For example, let's imagine it comes to know that the weather is going to be humid for the next couple of hours. So the setting in the air conditioner could be adjusted such that the humidity is reduced within the ambience within the room. Or if it's going to be very dry, if the weather forecast says it's going to be very dry, then maybe the humidity could be increased just a little in the ambience so that whoever is indoors would feel comfortable. So these are things that, let's say, we be talking about the ability to access content when you need it in whatever form you may need it in. When I access weather forecasts as a human, I would prefer to see a graphic, maybe a cloud and droplets of water and all of that. When this air conditioner is accessing weather content, none of that graphic is going to matter. I'm sure you would agree. What matters are going to be just the raw data. Like, for example, if I were to relate it to the financial domain, I would like to find out if this particular stock is doing well. Maybe if it is, or if there's an anticipation that it is going to rise and it's risen, it's gotten to a particular threshold, then maybe when I log into my finance website, since I've set a target, I could simply sell and book some profits. Like that, if let's say there is a device which would want to let me know that, look, your target price has been achieved, it's going to periodically check this particular source. The data is what it's interested in, and it's going to send me notifications, possibly saying, hey, look, your target price has been achieved. Do you want to proceed? You can sell and make profits and all of that. The point I'm trying to make, the bigger point is, these days we have even devices which are significantly interested to access web content, and therefore making sure we have our application authored in such a way that it is usable by both humans and also, so to speak, machines becomes important. It shouldn't be that our content becomes inaccessible altogether. Okay, that's one perspective. And I said the second one is in the context of accessibility. This is a term which is very popular in the context of web applications. Is this an acronym that we may have heard about? Anybody?
Yes, I have heard, but I forgot the full form.
No
Yes.
problem. Kiran?
Yes, rich interface applications.
I'm sorry, Kiran, say that again, please.
Rich interface applications.
Okay, the rich and applications is correct. Rich internet applications.
Rich interface or internet, sorry.
Internet applications. Okay. RIA is a very prominent pattern today when we attempt to author web applications. We would want to keep it rich, meaning it's got to be fluid, it's got to be dynamic, it's got to be interactive, color schemes have to be pleasing. There are quite a number of UX related principles that we could embrace. W3C apparently is working very closely with a group called the WAI, which stands for the Web Accessibility Initiative. And with their help, it is now being called ARIA, Accessible Rich Internet Applications. All right, accessible rich internet applications. Here's another example. Imagine I would want to be getting to a particular destination a few days from now. I want to get to a particular location. So this is, let's suppose, a new location. I don't know where it is. I haven't been there before. I would like to know a little more. Which route can I take and all of that? So on my handheld device, maybe I'm going to open up the Maps application and I'm going to say, this is my destination. It's immediately going to say, okay, you can take this route and it's going to get you there in about an hour and a half. Or you can take this route, maybe a little longer, but it's going to be a little faster. Or if you're okay with tolls and all that, you can choose to take an expressway and you're going to get to this location in so long a time and things like that. Now just imagine, okay, this is something I'm happy with. Let's suppose one evening I bump into an elderly gentleman on the street and I realize that this person is visually challenged. All right, this gentleman is visually challenged. I keep looking at the person, after apologizing for bumping in, and I notice that this person flips out a device from his jacket and starts speaking into his device, saying, oh, look, this is where I want to go. A minute later, the device talks back to him saying, oh, this is how far you are. This is how long it could take you to get there. Would you want to hail a cab? Now think about it. This is accessibility in action. This person is visually challenged. He's probably using a service, more like one of these personal assistants. It could be like the likes of Siri or Google Assistant or Alexa, one of those. And this personal assistant, this piece of software, has attempted to access a destination. Maybe what I saw in the Maps application is something similar to what this gentleman is doing. But this person is getting to access that information using audio verbally, whereas I got to see it on the screen of my handheld device. So more or less, it's the same kind of data, but the manner in which we are accessing that information is substantially different, which is where accessibility is very, very critical. So those are the two perspectives we're talking about in the context of point number 3 on the slide, universal access. We've got to keep content accessible, which is very, very critical in today's world. Support for world languages. This is, again, very obvious these days. We would want to make sure that we cater to different locales of the world. HTML5 embraces Unicode. It offers extensive support for Unicode. Secure by design, well, frankly, this has nothing to do with security per se. It talks about the fact that HTML5 provides us a pre-designated structure that we are expected to abide by. The last set of principles talk about interoperability, which say, oh, there's got to be a well-defined behavior, meaning if you create a web application, you open it in one user agent, meaning the browser, you open it in another browser, we expect to see the same kind of behavior. Avoid needless complexity. Remember, we have already come across the fact that we would want to keep the usage of scripts to the absolute minimum. All right, we want to keep the usage of scripts to the absolute minimum, use them only when absolutely necessary. And error handling is now much more structured and streamlined thanks to something we have already discussed. HTML5 is based on these 3 sets of design principles. If I may quickly enlist them again: compatibility, utility, and interoperability. These are the 3 principles that HTML5 has been designed on, so to speak, the 10 poles. And as I said before, I'd like to reiterate, these principles are usable even in the context of our own applications. It's not that we'd need to be isolating these. Even when we are authoring our own applications, a lot of these principles certainly can be embraced. Having said that, what is part of HTML5, therefore? Oh, we've got support for a number of new tags, including the likes of audio and video. Forms in HTML5 see a lot of enhancements with the inclusion of new input types. We now see something called the canvas, which provides, this is a new feature altogether, which provides us the ability to portray graphical content on a web page. So in simple English, it's like saying, oh, I can draw and paint on a web page. Web application features have been enhanced. There is the ability to make an entire web application offline if necessary. We could look at the ability to upload files from web applications in an asynchronous manner. DOM sees its share of enhancements. There are new methods, get elements by class name being one of them. I can get hold of all elements in the current document which is associated with a particular class, a CSS class, of course. I could even look at managing focus. I could say, oh, there's a property called active element. There's a property called has focus and things like that. These are relatively DOM related enhancements. Even as we're talking about these as these enhancements, we also need to spare a thought for some of the deprecations. So what's really gone? Frames are no longer supported in HTML5 broadly. The only kind of frame that continues to be supported happens to be an iframe. Let me say that again. The only kind of frame that continues to be supported here in HTML5 now happens to be an iframe. Acronym, base font, big center font, tele, type, none of these are tags that we are expected to be using anymore. Language property on script tags, not expected anymore. A lot of presentation attributes. Now, again, if you're wondering why no language property on script tags, apparently now, if you want to use scripts in the context of HTML, it is going to default to JavaScript. Previously we had an option. We could choose either JavaScript or we could choose VBScript. VBScript, of course, would have worked predominantly in Microsoft's browsers and maybe just another browser, but JavaScript pretty much worked universally. So Now, if you want to look at using scripts, we're going to default to JavaScript. Language, therefore, is not a mandatory requirement. A lot of presentation attributes, the likes of which include cell padding, cell spacing, width, and height, none of these are expected anymore. Size property on input fields, not expected anymore. And when you look at the points on the slide, overall, you may begin to get a little curious. What are we talking about? None of these are being used, so what are we going to do? Apparently, what's being suggested and recommended is please use CSS equivalents. Cell padding, cell spacing, width, and height. We had these as properties in the context of table-related usages in HTML. Size happens to be a property on input fields. What we are now being recommended is, oh, please use CSS equivalents. A significant takeaway from this is let HTML focus on the structure. Let it focus on ensuring that the particular the content is well organized. Because remember, we've spoken about a few principles just a little while ago. Let's not have everything kind of getting entangled, formatting and structure and everything getting entangled. CSS is amazingly good when it comes to formatting. Anything to do with formatting, let CSS take care of that. Let HTML focus on the markup and the structure in the context of the document. That's essentially what we have as a takeaway with respect to points on this slide. Okay, we would now want to understand the HTML5 page structure. A few things here. The first of them, extremely significant. It reads doc type HTML. Doc type HTML. First point there, I request everyone's attention. That is extremely critical. That is like a directive telling the browser that, hey, look, this is a document that's been written in accordance with the HTML standard. I'll say that again. The first line is like an instruction. Think of it as a directive saying, here's a document that's been written in accordance with the HTML standard. An observation I want all of you to make is there is no mention of any version number. Notice it doesn't say doc type HTML5, because if it did, then we would have a problem with respect to compatibility. All right. We don't want to have an issue with respect to compatibility. So it just says HTML. Next, the HTML tag, as you can observe, is associated with a property called lang, representing language. And here it reads en. Now, just in case we're curious, so why would we want to bring in this lang? This is to facilitate accessibility, one of the key characteristics, to facilitate accessibility. There are a lot of accessibility-oriented applications. An example of one of them could be a screen reader. I'll repeat that again. A screen reader is an accessibility-oriented application which can read out the content on the screen. So let's just imagine that there is a screen reader that's going to be reading out the content on this page. When it encounters this lang, it knows, look, this is the language that we have used to author the page. So this is the language appropriately you're going to use to read out the content. Now, in this case, I have simply said en. It could be en-us, where I could localize it, en-gb, or maybe even en-in, so that the screen reader is going to read with an appropriate accent, meaning that it's going to make a lot of sense to the person who is listening to the screen reader, the content that is being read. The meta, we see a meta usage here, the character set UTF-8. Now remember, I spoke about dealing with different languages of the world. Unicode compliance is what we are looking at. Just a quick question. Here, character set represents the encoding, the character set encoding. We've got ISO, which previously was very popular. It exists even now, by the way. And we have Unicode, represented by this UTF stuff. We have Unicode. Does anyone have an idea what the difference could be, if at all there are any differences between the two? ISO versus Unicode, maybe? Any idea? Okay, this is a question I certainly would like you to do a little bit of, maybe you can take this as homework. I'd like you to do a little bit of reading upon ISO and Unicode. What would the difference between the two be, if at all there are any? And when might we choose to use either? Okay, this is with respect to the character set. The concept of encoding and character set is certainly not new or exclusive to what we're currently referring. The rest of the content, if you notice, is going to look pretty standard. Okay, we've got a title, we've got a link tag, it's referring to a CSS file. There's a meta, which is more to do with SEO related stuff. And that's about what this document is primarily going to constitute, typically the structure. All right, so we would now want to understand what goes in, but more importantly, there are a few other things that we intend to also be looking at in particular. What I suggest we do is we'll take a break at this point. I suppose a logical point in time, though maybe I overshot a few minutes than what I had anticipated. Nonetheless, we'll take a break at this point, a logical point in our discussion as well. We'll get back in about 20 minutes. I hope that's okay with everyone. Maybe we could just grab ourselves some beverage and we'll get back in about 20 minutes. So roughly say 15 minutes past 11, we will continue our discussion.
Okay.
Lakshman, before the break, I have a question.
Yes, Suman?
So as you said, the doc type HTML, that is something like it's like declaring that I will follow the HTML standard. My question is, what will happen or what is the impact if I don't mention it? I mean, what are the major impacts that can happen to the website or the page?
If you don't mention it, it is simply going to be regarded as plain vanilla HTML, because going forward, the roadmap says we are going to make things a little more stringent in the context of HTML. There are quite a number of features that will be introduced gradually, eventually. So in those cases, we will lose out on the standardization part. So at this moment, at this point in time, Suman, you might not see any huge adverse impact. Things are going to still be okay. They're going to probably work the way you expect them to. But this is something we are being advocated to follow. So if you're going to write pages afresh, if you're going to author pages afresh, this is something we are being asked to embrace. Because gradually, we will see a slight standard, rather, I must say, a slight amount of strictness being introduced, and this is going to be enhanced slowly over a period of time. And that's when this doc type becomes really critical. You're familiar with XML, are you, Suman?
Yes.
Okay, in XML, if you recollect, we had this concept of DTDs.
Yeah, correct.
If you wanted to associate a DTD with the XML document, we had to use this doc type. Basically telling the parser that our XML document is adhering to a particular structure. We are doing something similar, but now there is a lot of leniency because this is a transitionary phase. We are looking at introducing a lot of new things and we can't bring in all of those in one go. There will be, it will be gradual, and eventually we will get to a phase where things are going to certainly be a lot more better structured.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Umashankar?
Yeah, got it.
Okay. All right. So I'll just step aside. We'll resume at 15 minutes past 11.
Yes.
So I think Lakshman, we can start.
All right, Umashankar. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the HTML5 page structure. In this usage that we currently see, apparently there is a link tag that we have associated with the current document. The link here is being used to have a CSS being used in the context of the current document. So that's an association which we seem to have set up. In addition to CSS, the link tag can also be employed for a couple of other purposes. the likes of which include an alternate form of content, such as in an RSS feed. Let me say that again. An alternate form of content, such as in an RSS feed. Frankly, have we heard about RSS feeds?
Yes, but
Okay.
I've just heard of it.
All right.
Never used it.
Never used it. All right. Anyone who might have a clue? RSS feeds? Because this is extremely popular even in the in quite a number of verticals, including finance. We have this being extremely extensively employed. RSS at the very outset does not have anything to do with a group with political affiliations. In this context, RSS would stand for Rich Site Summary. Rich site as in SITE, Rich Site Summary. Or another way to look at RSS as an acronym would be Really Simple Syndication. Let me say that again. Really Simple Syndication. RSS is essentially a standard which talks about being able to make content available, the content that's available at a particular source, in a rich format. Rich here would mean we're talking about content being a combination of text and also graphical data. Graphical data as in images. So we're talking about content that is textual, content that is graphical as well. An RSS feed, all said and done, is predominantly XML. It is in an XML format. So should you want to associate an RSS feed with the current HTML document, we're going to be needing to use a link tag as illustrated on the slide, and we will be having it mapped to an XML file. The href would point to an XML file. All right. Now notice it says alternate link rel here, meaning we want to relate to an alternate form of content. Type, it says application /atom plus XML. That's more to do with the format. Having said that, just a quick question I thought. Here, when we look at this property called type, in the case of typical CSS, we would have seen type would have been text/CSS. If we were using this in conjunction with JavaScript, given that I believe most of us have a fair understanding, this would have been text/JavaScript. Now, if someone were to ask us, what's this what's this type property? What would you want to call it? Would we have a clue? This type property. Now, in the case of the link, we would say link type is text/CSS. For the script tag, we could have said script type text/JavaScript. So in case we were to be asked, what's this type property? What would you think we might want to say? Would we have an idea?
Letting the browser know which type of file.
Okay.
Does it mean some language? What language should be used in the link?
All right. That is for the JavaScript, but for the CSS, I suppose we are not looking at any language, isn't it, Ravindra?
Yes, right.
Okay, so in that case, what might you want to say type represents? Suman?
It's something like the renderer is reading this and trying to like compute in its own way, something like that.
Okay. All right. The type property here, we call this the content type, or it's also called the MIME. Would you have heard of this? MIME? MIME. Is that something we've heard of?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it heard and that's about it? Or would we have an idea what it is meant to do or what it stands for and all that?
Like every file extension like have one MIME type associated with it.
Okay.
So basically, I have heard it mostly in terms of mails,
Uh-huh.
MIME.
Okay. You could have this in one of the configurational settings in mail, isn't it?
Yes,
Whether it supports main, MIME or SMIME and things like that.
yes.
All right. MIME is an acronym that stands for Multi-Purpose Internet Mail Extensions. Multi-Purpose Internet Mail Extensions, MIME. Content type or the MIME type, as we would prefer terming it. Now, why are we even talking about this? Would we need something like this? The concept is simple, but the implication is extremely significant. Whenever a server sends down some content to the client, or when a client sends something to the server, either ways, the recipient will need to be told, look, this is the kind of data I am sending out to you. Please be prepared to deal with it. I'll say that once again. Whenever you're sending out something to a recipient, you would want to indicate that, look, this is the kind of data I am sending out to you. Please be prepared to deal with it. On the basis of that information, the recipient would know what to do. Now, let's take this for example, this line here, line number 22 on my screen. I am indicating that the type is going to be textual content. The format will be CSS. File format, let's say, will be CSS. Here, the type is going to be textual and it is going to be a JavaScript based resource. On the other hand, if let us say I'm dealing with a PDF file, then it is going to be in this format, application/PDF. Now, why application? Frankly, because the browser by itself may not know how to work with a PDF file. It may not be able to recognize the format, and we all realize it is not going to be pure textual format after all. So it's got to be read by some application. What kind of application, what format are we dealing with? A PDF format, application/PDF. Likewise, given the fact that we're all familiar with JSON, I hope we are. Are we familiar with JSON?
Yes.
Yes.
Would any of us have an idea what would be the MIME type for JSON?
Application.
Text.
Indeed, application/JSON. All right, it is going to be of this form. Why might I be needing to do something like this? Imagine I am making a call to a remote resource, which is a REST API. I make a call and that's going to give me a response. It's going to give me a response in a JSON format. So the client needs to be aware of what to do with the content, how to work with it. And in all of these cases, these types are going to be extremely significant. They represent the content type or the MIME type, respectively. Now, in our case, if I may switch back to the slide, here it says type, application.
One question is there.
Yes, Vinod?
Content type and MIME is both are similar or there is some
You can
difference?
use them interchangeably, Vinod. You can use them interchangeably. So they represent the same entity.
So it means there is no change. They both are same.
Yeah, they are representing the same thing.
Okay.
The reason why the term content type was introduced is because the word MIME had a lot of people being a little apprehensive about it being associated with the term mail. Mail extensions is what we use it. So some people were apprehensive and they said, we don't want it to sound like it's used exclusively for mail. So we would want to use a slightly generic term, and hence the term content type came into existence. But as such, we're talking about the same thing. All right. So here we are saying type. Notice in the link tag, type is application. Okay. Application which can understand an XML structure. Atom happens to be a standard. Atom happens to be a standard. This is in the context of an RSS feed. So apparently, the browser will need to either understand an RSS feed by itself. Apparently, some browsers do, and a lot many don't. In which case, it will have to use an application which can deal with an RSS feed, can understand XML and all of that. Now, in the context of many web browsers, we have what are called feed readers. Chrome, for example, does not understand an RSS feed out of the box. I can therefore install an extension. I can add an extension to Chrome, an extension that understands an RSS feed. And once enabled, if a web page has an RSS feed, then that extension will be able to relate and probably tell me that, look, there is an RSS feed. Would you want me to read, and things like that. So the link tag, of course, you can use that in conjunction with CSS. It can also be used to associate an alternate form of content, as in an RSS feed. We're not done yet. In addition, the link tag can also be used to associate something called a shortcut icon with the current document. Just a quick piece of information. Previously, this was called a fave icon or a favorite icon. Now,